Hi, we're going to learn and practice some vocabulary for ionic bonds. So the instructions here tell you to find a place where you will be comfortable speaking out loud, open the PDF and use the notes sheets in Notability, watch the video, and as you watch, make sure that you pause and highlight and fill in your notes sheet. Then also remember the strategies we talked about watching videos, that you should pause the video often, speak out loud and repeat after me, and rewind the video to repeat if needed, and also slow the playback speed if needed. In the last lesson, you learned that atoms will gain or lose electrons in order to become stable, and when they do that, they become an ion with a charge. And this periodic table shows us the pattern that's formed because of the dot diagrams or the valence electron pattern that atoms have. So all of the atoms in group 1 will form a +1 ion, group 2 +2. We skip the D block because they don't really follow a clear pattern, but then all of these are +3. This group, they tend to just share electrons in covalent bonds and don't form ions. But then the next group, -3, because now they're gaining electrons, -2, -1, and then the noble gases are stable. So let's say this pattern going across left to right together, and hopefully you'll start to memorize the pattern then. +1, +2, +3, share, -3, -2, -1, stable. +1, +2, +3, share, -3, -2, -1, stable. +1, +2, +3, share, -3, -2, -1, stable. All right, if you didn't get that yet, then go back and do it again. So vocabulary is really important in all subject areas, and especially in science, some of it is a little strange. So first of all, an ion is an atom with a charge. An ion can either have a positive charge, which means that the atom lost electrons, or a negative charge if the atom gained electrons. It's helpful to know that on our periodic table, remember the step line right here, that divides the metals. So all of these on this side are metals from the nonmetals. And I'm using some pink here to help you see that the metals are always going to become positive ions, and the nonmetals always become negative ions. And you'll learn a lot more about that as we go. But let's remind then, when an atom loses electrons, it gives them away, and then it will become positive. So losing is positive and gaining is negative. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video and just do that a few times. And I'm going to do it a couple more times here that you can do with me. So losing is positive, gaining is negative. Losing is positive, gaining is negative. You try it. All right, I hope you did that. Now back to our notes here. So on this slide, we see an oxygen up here, or the periodic table square for oxygen. And then remember that the atomic number of 8 means in an atom of oxygen, there are 8 protons, A equals P, and 8 electrons. So on this side here, we have an atom of oxygen drawn, and notice it has 2 electrons in the first energy level, and then 6 more in the second energy level to make 8. So that's the 8 total, and that means there are 6 in the valence electron shell. So 2 in the first and then 6. But an atom of oxygen is not stable. It's very unstable because remember that the octet rule says that 8 valence electrons is what is stable. So what it likes to do, if it can, is it likes to gain 2 electrons. And in this picture over here, we see there's an extra one here that I didn't see before on the other side. And there's an extra one here. So here there were 2 that were lonely, and now they all have a pair. So the atom now is not called an atom, it's called an ion. So the ion is the word we use for the oxygen when it has a charge. So since it now has 10 electrons, 2 in the first energy level and 8 in the second, it's stable now because 8 valence electrons is stable, but now it has a charge of -2 because each of those 2 electrons are negative. So 2 extra electrons means -2. But the main thing I want you to know here is that the word atom is for when there's no charge, and ion is for when there is a charge. All right, so everybody say atom, no charge, atom, no charge, and ion has a charge. Ion has a charge. Our next slide, we're going to get a little more detailed because since there are 2 kinds of ions, positive or negative, we have different words for those. So, vocabulary, an ion can be either positive or negative. And here again, I'm using pink for positive and blue for negative. And the word for a positive ion is cation. So a cation, everybody say cation, cation, cation. It sounds like the word cat. It looks like cation, but it's cation. So the cation is a positive ion. And cations are always a metal, and they're formed by losing electrons. So if you remember back on this slide, metals always want to lose electrons and they become positive, so they are going to become cations. There's a few ways that people help remember this. If you see here, it says cations are positive, like the word paw for the cat paws. So here's a picture of that. Cations are positive. And also the T for the word cation, the T looks a little bit like a plus sign, like positive. So cations are positive. It's also important to know, and we'll get to it more later, but cations keep the same name as the element that they were. So for example, Na is called sodium, and Na+, so the sodium cation, is also called sodium. It doesn't have a special name. So now let's look at anions. An anion is a negative ion, and it's always a nonmetal, and they're formed by gaining electrons. So gaining is negative. When atoms gain electrons, they become negative, and they are called anions. You could just say ion, but saying anion is more specific, that it's a negative ion. And we say the word like that, anion, very strong anion. And it looks like the word onion, and onions, some people, it makes you cry. So the word anion, looking like the word onion, can kind of help us remember that's the negative one. Anions are negative, but also the letter N in anion helps me remember. So everybody say anion, anion, one more time, anion. And anions are negative. Anions are negative. For naming, the anion name changes to end in "ide." So for example, O is oxygen, but O2 negative is called oxide. So you've probably heard of oxide before, like carbon dioxide, and that's where that comes from. So here are all the nonmetals that we use in chemistry, and then their "ide" name there. So I'm going to turn off my camera so you can see it a little bit better. So I'm going to ask you to repeat after me. If the name is nitrogen, we keep the nitra part and we drop the agen, and it becomes nitride. So nitrogen becomes nitride. Everybody say nitride. And let's actually say them both. Nitrogen, nitride. Say it with me. Nitrogen, nitride. Now say it with me. Oxygen, oxide. One more time. Oxygen, oxide. Next one. Fluorine, fluoride. One more time. Fluorine, fluoride. Next one. Phosphorus, phosphide. Together, phosphorus, phosphide. Next, sulfur, sulfide. Together, sulfur, sulfide. Next, chlorine, chloride. Together, chlorine, chloride. Next, bromine, bromide. Together, bromine, bromide. Next, iodine, iodide. Together, iodine, iodide. So it's the same word, just with that "ide" ending there. This next slide shows a summary of pretty much everything we just went through. So let's just read it through. An ionic bond is one that forms between ions with opposite charges. And those ions will be a cation and an anion. Cations are always metals that have lost electrons. Here's another memory tool. Lip, L-I-P, spells lip. And losing is positive. Losing is positive, lip. Losing electrons leads to a positive charge. And so that means cations are positive. And remember also, cats have paws. Cations are positive. On the other side, anions, kind of looks like the word onion. It's a non-metal atom that gained electrons. And here's another memory tool, gin, G-I-N, spells gin. Gaining is negative. Gaining is negative. So lip, losing is positive, losing is positive, losing is positive, but gaining is negative. Gaining is negative. And anions, or here gaining electrons leads to a negative charge. Anions are negative, therefore, and the name changes to the "ide" ending.
Plus one, plus two, plus three, share. Minus three, minus two, minus one, stable. Boom, chick, boom, boom, chick, boom, chick, boom, boom, chick. Plus one, plus two, plus three, share. Minus three, minus two, minus one, stable. Boom, chick, boom, boom, chick.